It's a pleasure for me to be here and get the chance to talk to you on Students for Liberty conference. And now let's see what we will be talking about and then discussing. So, first, let's take some look on the war on drugs history and propaganda and the reality. Then let's talk about how to do it better. So I suggest peace on drug instead of war on drugs. And then I will tell you something about drugs in general. And in the end, I would like to talk about the most important thing, and is the self-ownership, which is a very important topic related to drugs. So, first, what the government tells us about war on drugs. They tell us that we need it, and that it's protecting us, and that if the drugs wouldn't be forbidden, it would be some drug-Armageddon here, and the society will perish because of too many junkies. We hear it from everywhere. We can hear it in medias, we can hear it at schools, so everybody knows it's true even without thinking about it. It's interesting how many things are spread around the society that people just knows them and they don't have to think about it. And the surprising thing for you, I want to tell you, is the governments are just lying to us. It's not like that. And I will show you some facts about it. Most of people think that, well, drugs were always legal and they weren't regulated. And most of people think that then came problems, so the states had to come and regulate the drugs. And most of people think that the massive wave or the war on drugs was started by Nixon in 1971. Even in the previous speech it was mentioned. But the roots of war on drugs are much, much, much older. The war on drugs started in United States in 19th century, which is very surprising. And there is one advantage about this. Now we have the political correct speaking, so the politics are hiding things probably more than back then. But back then they could openly declare why they are doing what they are doing, and they really did. So if you do some research, they were openly talking about why they are banning drugs in 19th century. And it wasn't public health care, it wasn't protection of childs and so on. No, it was racism. Openly declared racism by American politics. And the point was that each nation or race had their own drugs. Americans had alcohol, Chinese had opium, Mexican had coca, black people had also coca, and they were just banning those drugs which were the Americans. And it was really declared like this, and you can really find how the congressmen were saying that publicly loud. They were talking about how in our peaceful country where there are white fathers of families, there are also living some Chinese guys who are taking opium. So let's forbid the opium. Let's forbid the cocaine and stuff which is used by other races. Another interesting story is how the cannabis was banned. Cannabis was banned by lobbying of competitors, because the cannabis was originally, well, it was probably always somehow used as a drug, but it was used even in agriculture and many other stuff to produce So it was competing, for example, with wood to create paper. Because originally the paper was created by wood, it was made of wood, and then some technologies came and it was shown that from cannabis it can be done much effectively. The same for clothes which were from nylon, which were of nylon, and then the nylon started to be replaced by cannabis. So the lobby made the ban of it. Again, this is you can research for this and you can find, because back then the information was much more spread to public and not so much hidden. And this was all American stuff. Back then this was problems of United States, and the drugs were banned in United States. And also in other countries, but the somehow worldwide ban came in 1961 when it was pushed by United States through United Nations to all around the world. And the question still can be, okay, the war on drugs didn't start it because of our safety, it started because of racism, but okay, what if it still protects us? Does it? Absolutely not. It's doing exact opposite. It's harming the society. And I will show you how and why. Some of that I will just say briefly because we had the previous speech about it here. But one of the reasons is the quality control. If the drugs are legal, the quality control can be somehow managed better. As they are illegal, the quality control is bad, so the people are buying whatever and ruining themselves. Many people think, okay, it's some junkies, so they don't care. Fine, I don't have this opinion, but this may be a weak argument for somebody. Then maybe better argument. The war on drugs is increasing the prices of drugs, which again seems like it's a problem for the junkies, but it's in fact a problem for all the society. Because if you are addicted on heroin or crack or whatever, your biggest problem from the beginning is not the drug itself, because you can still live addicted for 10, 20, 30 years. Not everybody, but the people definitely can. And you can see it at some rich people who are taking drugs, like some rock stars. They are taking it for all their life because they have money. And as they have money, maybe they die a bit earlier, but as they have money, they don't have to go at street and rob you and steal your money and do criminality. As the price of drugs is like 10 times or 100 times higher because they are illegal, the people who are addicted are just doing the crime. And moreover, as they have financial problems, their addiction is getting deeper much faster because they are desperate. So they are running back to the drug. So increasing the price of the drugs is making the addiction started faster and making the addicted much more violent. I am not apologizing their acting. I am not excusing that. It's anyway bad when you rob somebody to get money on your drugs. But the fact is that if the drugs are cheap, you don't have to do that. And the last thing is organized crime and mafias. Their income is practically only by the stuff which are forbidden by government, weapons, drugs. So the mafias are living from this. And the great example on all of this stuff is the US prohibition on alcohol. It's exactly the same what's now happening all around the world with all the drugs. The difference is that the prohibition was mainstream. So everybody cared, and then it had to stop because the people were just against it. But in democracy, when you are a minority, you have a problem. And the junkies are minority. And nobody cares of them. But the arguments, the effects, the consequences, everything is exactly the same like the alcohol prohibition. And the alcohol prohibition was tragedy. It was tragedy because it was really wide. But the same tragedy is happening with all the drugs, just in smaller amounts, with little people. And nobody cares of them. And everybody quite now sees that the war on drugs has failed. And I think that the most significant and maybe quite ironical is the Global Commission on Drug Policy. This commission is made of former mighty men who were themselves doing the war on drugs in last century and even then. There are presidents of many countries, mainly Latin America. There are ministers of many countries. There are some high officials, former high officials from United Nations or European Union and so on. So these people, when they had their power and when they had their position, they were doing and performing war on drugs. Now, when they are retired and they are not living from that, they are having a commission, and now they don't have the incentive to say war on drugs is good. They are already out of their power, out of their position. So now they are doing researches, and this sentence I have here, it's exact quotation from some their research, from something what they published, and they said the global war on drugs has failed with devastating consequences for individuals and societies around the world. So even the people who were in charge of the war on drugs are now saying that it failed. And I have one great example, another example how it failed, and it is about Portugal. In Portugal, in 90s, they had their terrible problems with drugs. They had there incredibly many of addicted, they have there many deaths of overdose, and they had there even HIV, very high rate because of drugs. And what did they do? Because the public start to press on politics. So in 2001, they made small amount of any drug legal in Portugal. Not selling, but at least keeping and taking. So in Portugal, you can legally take heroin and any other drugs you want. You can keep it, and if police stops you and you have it, nothing happens. And what happened then after 10 years? After 10 years, it incredibly helped. The crime dropped, the HIV dropped, and many problems were solved. I have here one absolutely fascinating statistics. It's about overdosed people. In average in Europe, on 1 million citizens, 17 of them overdose per year with drugs. 17. It's European average. In Portugal, in 1990 till 2000, it was 80. And after this, after they legalized the drugs, it dropped to 3. 27 times. It was just banned, then they legalized, and everybody would think, okay, now there will be a lot of people who will be just dying of drugs. No, it went exactly opposite. And you know what I find the most fascinating on this all? This is not surprising me. This is quite logical. But the most fascinating is that in the 2001, when the politics had the problem with drugs, like now here the politics are talking about drugs sometimes, and they are using it as a tool for getting some votes, that they are saying junkies are bad and we will do something with that. But it's not a problem for them, in fact. In Portugal, it really became a problem for them, because the public were really unsatisfied with it. The politicians exactly knew what to do. This, you know, it's like, not that these things which I am telling here are somehow hidden and nobody knows. It just, when you really want to solve the problem with drugs, even if you are a politician, and you start to care about it, like really, more than just for your votes and for elections, you just know what to do. Just legalize that. And so, when the war on drugs has failed, what we should do? I think we should do peace on drugs. And we shouldn't initiate violence. Because this is exactly what's happening when we have the so-called drug policy. When we have drug policy, it means that when somebody is taking drugs, we are using violence against them. We are putting them to prison, and this is not helping them. This is not helping quite anybody to put these people to prisons when they are more having drugs and doing other things, because the prisons are full of drugs. And I think making peace on drugs means give the truth to the people, even at schools, mainly at schools, but even in medias, everywhere. I think at schools we shouldn't teach against drugs. We should teach about drugs. And we should inform the people and tell them what the drugs really are, because they are dangerous and you can really harm yourself with them, but not the way they are mostly describing at schools. It differs school from school, but when I was at school, and I think like 90% of people, they were told that drugs are just all bad and all drugs were described like heroin. You take it and you die on the street. But if you exaggerate like this, then the kids are going and try something, because kids are just doing that. They try marijuana or whatever, and they find out that they are not dying. And then they just don't trust you anymore. Because if you described all the drugs like heroin, they start to take them and they find out that it's just not true. So then they are not having respect to drugs, and they are using it recklessly. And we should talk not just about the risk and dangers. We should also talk about the benefits, because many people ask then the questions to themselves like, if the drugs are so bad, why do people are taking them then? They are paying high money for them and risking, why? Well, all drugs are dangerous and potentially fatal, and we should definitely have respect and not take it too much easy. But we should realize that the drugs are differing from each other. Many people are just saying drugs like some one thing which you take and then die. But in fact, the drugs are very different. There are drugs which can threaten you by mental way, but they are absolutely not toxic, like for example LSD. But there are also drugs which can absolutely destroy you physically, like heroin. There are drugs which are creating incredibly strong addiction, like alcohol or nicotine also. And also with this, we should probably break the barrier how many people think that alcohol and cigarettes are somehow okay drugs and all the other drugs are somehow bad. This is total bullshit, because I'm not saying that the alcohol is the most dangerous drug, but it's among the more dangerous. And there is many drugs which are less dangerous than alcohol, and they are just forbidden, so people are respecting them and rather sitting at the pub drinking beer and saying, I would put all the junkies into the prison. And the effect of drugs is very subjective, of course, and also the utility is subjective. It's economy, you probably all know, and of course the utility of drugs as well. So for somebody, the goods can be better than the bads of drugs, and for somebody it can be just opposite. It's individual, like quite everything. But yes, drugs also can help you to relax or discover yourself. And I'm not telling you go and take drugs. I'm telling you to find more about drugs and then make your decision what you want to do. But I want to show you few things, like specific some graphs. For example, this graph is here is some dependency potential, and here is active dose divided by lethal dose. So it means that, for example, if something would have 0.2, it means that if you take 5 times more than the normal dose, you die on it, in average, let's say. Of course, it's not a precise measure. And what's interesting here, you have here, look, the alcohol here is the so peaceful drug. Somebody is also saying that it's not a drug, and it's here. And all the terrible drugs like LSD, marijuana, the ketamine, they are somewhere here in the graph. And of course, we have more dangerous drugs than alcohol. Another graph I want to show you is this is such a. Of course, there is a problem. This graph is trying to somehow imply how much it's harming you, how much it's creating dependency. The problem, of course, is that 1, 2, 3. It's not some exact measure, but it's some study of Lancet. So there is some, they try to do some science around it, and they came to this. But of course, you can say that this is not precise, and that's true. Because this harm can be like physical, mental, whatever. But again, alcohol over here. Of course, here are more dangerous drugs. By the way, tobacco is here. Dependency, incredible. Harm, quite high. And here you have that terrible drugs like ecstasy, LSD, and so on. And the most interesting graph I saved for the end, and it's graph harms to self and harm to others. On this, you have how much you are harming others, how much you are harming self with this drug. So, for example, how often you die on the drug. And here on this X, it's like how you harm others with the drug. And it's really interesting that, for example, when you are taking methamphetamine, you are very dangerous to yourself, but you are almost not dangerous to people around. The alcohol is here. You're incredibly dangerous mainly to people around you than to yourself. And here you have heroin, also less dangerous than alcohol to the others, even if more dangerous to you. And here some cocaine, LSD. Yeah, on this graph you have cocaine and crack cocaine, like 2 dots. On the previous you had 1, so it was some average. So this is about drugs, and now I would like to talk about the most important thing of this presentation: self-ownership. I own my body, therefore it's my freedom how I want to use it, waste it, or care about it. It's about me. It's my freedom. And you shouldn't take anybody to decide about your body, because the body is yours. And if the government tells you what drugs you should and shouldn't take, it's denying your self-ownership. They are then telling you you are not owner of the body, the government is. And I think this is the most terrible thing, that they are telling us that we are not owning our bodies, not even that. There is one argument to this, and the argument says, what about the public health care? If you waste your body, the others will pay that. And you know what? It's a great argument. I love that argument, like really. And I absolutely agree with that. It's the best argument against the public health care. And you should be really free to do whatever with your body, and you should take the consequences and bring the responsibility. So, what we were talking about, such a summary. The war on drugs is hell, and they are lying to us that it's because of our protection. So make peace, not war. And the most important, free people own their own bodies. If the government tells you that you don't, then you are becoming the slave of the government. So this is quite everything to the drugs. And I have here one last thing which is not so much related, and I thank to Students for Liberty that they give me this space to say that. I finished my book. I will be publishing it, and I am making crowdfunding on it. And I ask you all, if you like my presentation or if you know my work and like it, you can support me on this webpage, kniha.urza.cz. And if you send me there something, you can, of course, buy that book, and you can be also mentioned in that book as donors. So thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions, you can ask me now.